The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good morning, everybody in local government land, and welcome to this module, which is Module 4, Getting the Very Best from the People that You Lead. Welcome, and I apologise again for changing the time. Unfortunately, I'm up in Weipa today doing some work in the mining industry, and I believe we've got some people here in the webinar today from Weipa. So welcome. It's a lovely day outside. It was last time I looked anyway. So welcome, and I'm hoping that I can leave you with some really interesting information about how you might get the very best from the people that you lead. The usual approach here is to type in your questions. I just want to make sure that I'm coming across loud and clear. Could you please, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I just type in clear. Let me know that I'm coming across loud and clear. That's really important. Looks like I am. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thanks, Marianne. Anyone else? Okay. Looks like I'm coming across loud and clear, which is great. So if you've got questions, the normal procedure, if you've got questions during the broadcast, then type them into the question box. I'll stop at the time when I see them, and I'll respond to them immediately. That'll save us having a 10-minute break at the end, awkward 10 minutes while people start collecting their thoughts and their questions. So just type your questions in as you go, and that would be really, really useful for me and for you too. All right, so let's move on and let's have a look at what we've covered so far. So we have we've looked at, as you can see on your screen here, we have looked at module 1, which is, or unit 1 as it's called here. We looked at the ingredients of effective feedback, and what I was asking you to do there, of course, was to find 3 things that you can give feedback on each day, and to do that and to have a preference towards positive feedback. Most of us not hesitant in giving negative feedback, but I wonder how many of us actually give positive feedback. So I hope you're still doing that. And then in Unit 2, you might recall we did the Influencing Capabilities Framework, or Influencing Capabilities Profile, and essentially what that was about was to give you an opportunity to understand your preferred influencing strategy. And the key for you to be a better influencer as a leader is actually to use all 4 approaches: investigation and calculation, which are both logical approaches to influence, and motivation and collaboration, which are more emotional forms of influence. And the key thing there is that if you're using, and that you are prepared to use, a variety of approaches, it's likely that you're going to be far more persuasive with the people that you lead, both upwards, downwards and sideways. So that was Module 2. And then in Module 3, which only occurred 2 weeks ago, we looked at optimising team performance. And I guess my key point there was that we need to be having regular conversations with the people we lead. So these are what often are called check-ins. We need to be spending time with people, checking in. And I don't mean checking up, I mean checking in. So this is about dealing with people where they're at and talking to them about their own development. So these are developmental conversations. And I hope you've had a chance to implement a process where you're meeting with everyone just for 10 minutes every fortnight, just to check in. And I think if you do that, you'll find that that will do a lot in terms of building camaraderie up, building trust between you and the person or persons that you lead, and also just creating the right environment. Which leads us on to Unit 4 today, which is about getting the best out of the people that you lead. So I'm going to lead you through a process today about how you might get more discretionary performance from people and what you might do or not do that can contribute to that. I won't go through this, but in Module 5 we'll do understanding people and their personalities. And what I'll do, I'll be sending you out the second diagnostic, but this will be done by paper. So this afternoon, hopefully, you will receive a copy of that diagnostic, and I'd like you to complete that before we meet again in a fortnight, so that when we do meet, we can debrief on that. And then finally, we'll look at facilitating effective meetings in Unit 6. All right, so that's our process so far, and so don't be shy. Ask questions when they come up in your mind, or make comments or observations, or challenge things that I've said, to be quite honest. Whatever you feel you can do to make this as interactive as we possibly can. Now, I'm going to challenge you that I personally think that your primary role as a leader is to get the very best out of the people that you lead. Now, for some of you, you might think, well, that's a tall order, because there's some people in my team who really aren't performing, and to get them to be performing at a maximum level might seem like a Herculean effort. But I would ask you to think of it this way, that if you could rate your team members on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of the productivity that they're producing. So, for example, if someone's a 4, it might not be realistic to get them to a 10, at least not in the short term. But it is possible to get them to a 5. Or someone that might be an 8, it's possible to get them to a 9. Or if someone's a 3, you could get them to a 4. And if you can get a 10% increase in performance from each person that you lead, and let's say you're leading 5 people, that's a 50% performance. Exponentially, that will make a huge difference in terms of performance in your work area. So I'd be saying to you, don't drop your standards, but just be realistic about your expectations. You're looking for small incremental changes in people's discretionary performance. And that's what this webinar is all about. How might we get people from a 4 to a 5? How might we get them from a 6 to a 7? That's essentially what we're trying to do. So I'd like to challenge you that your role is actually to get the best in local government out of the people that you lead. So what are we covering during this session? Well, there's 4 things that I want to cover. I want to talk about some myths around motivation. I think a lot of us have been brought up with some misleading statements and comments about motivation, and I think I need to dispel those and give you an opportunity to take a fresh look at motivation and performance. I'm going to share with you some survey data that came from 9,000 people across 3 continents who completed a survey through Harvard University, and the question was asked, what is the number 1 quality that you want in your job? And so what I'm going to show you is a summary of that research, and probably what I'm doing there is suggesting to you that you need to create the motivational environment where those 10 things are in play. Thirdly, I want to talk about job and non-job tasks, and job tasks are relatively well understood. Job tasks are what's on the job description, and the job description, of course, is what governs people's performance in local government. But there is another dimension of performance that's often forgotten, and that's what I refer to as non-job tasks. For example, a non-job task is being a team player. It's not normally documented on the job description, and if it is, it's usually done towards the end as a bullet point. But non-job performance makes a huge difference to people's performance. So I want to talk about that, and I'll end up the presentation showing you a couple of reputable models on motivation and give you an opportunity to think about how you might apply that in your own working area. So that's the 4 things, so let's get underway. Now, the first thing that I want to do at this stage is, and it's up on your screen now, it looks like a very busy slide, but I just wanted to explain to you what my definition of motivation is, and I want to give you an opportunity to look at 3 dimensions of motivation, because when you're looking at someone that you feel isn't demotivated or not motivated to the level that you'd like, instead of us just making the sweeping statement that they're not motivated, perhaps what might be a good idea is for us to understand what dimension of motivation is missing. So you can see in the middle there's a definition, and this is the definition that I'm going to use. So motivation is the forces within an individual that account for the level, direction and persistence of effort expended at work. So there's some key words in there. You'll notice that within has been highlighted. Now within means that motivation comes from within. So we can create external stimuli, but the reality is that it's people's choice about whether they become motivated. It's not your choice, it's their choice. And that's important to understand. I'll build on that a little bit later. And then we're talking about three dimensions here. We're talking about the level of motivation, we're talking about the direction of motivation, and we're talking about the persistence of effort. And I want to talk about each of those. And as you notice around the definition, I've got a definition for each of those three dimensions of motivation. So let's start with direction. And I know this firsthand, having done a lot of consulting in local government, that the work that people do is not always the work they should be doing. In other words, they might be very busy, but it may not be the work that they need to do. So the direction of the work, that is the choices that people make in relation to the work that they do, is critically important. So if people are not working on the right thing at the right time in the right way, then it's likely that they do not meet the criteria of direction. So as leaders, what this means is that we've got to continually remind people of what their direction should be. And this could be done informally, one-on-one, or it could be done in a team meeting. But we need to make people absolutely crystal clear about what we expect them to be working on at different times, different projects. And most of us in our busy world are very busy. And most of us at times go off track, including you and me. But my comment to you is that what we should be trying to do is to give people a clarity around what's important in the workplace. So that's the first direction. That's the first dimension, I should say. The second dimension is persistence. So this is sticking at something long enough. So, I can think of a very common analogy that someone joins a gym and they go along for 2 sessions. They've paid a fortune. They've paid a 12-month membership. They've gone along for 2 sessions. They've come home exhausted and sore. And then they think, well, that's not for me. I'll do something else. So that's an example of a lack of persistence towards a particular goal, which in this case might be to become fit and healthy. So in the workplace, what we're looking for is people that will stick at it until they've finished it, whatever it might be that you're asking them to do. So persistence is the second dimension of motivation. Now, the third dimension of motivation is level. And what I mean by level is the level of intensity of effort that people put in. So this is about people not going at half speed or going very slowly. This is people putting in significant effort in terms of the work that they're doing. So if you look at those definitions, what that means is that when you're looking at someone whose motivational levels aren't where you want them to be, the key question to ask is not whether they're motivated. That's obvious, they're not. The key question then is to ask, is it their direction, persistence, or level that's lacking? So if it's their direction, then obviously you give them a set of priorities to help them get back on track. If it's their persistence, you perhaps have an encouraging conversation with them to let them know that they need to persist to get this done. And if it's their intensity, perhaps another encouraging conversation around that, giving them clear deadlines, explaining expectations to them and so forth. So hopefully that's just set up the broadcast so that you understand that this is what I'm really on about, 3 dimensions. And if those 3 dimensions, of course, have been fulfilled, the argument is that that person is demonstrating motivation in their work. So now let's turn to some myths around motivation, and let me talk about some of the things that we've learnt through the years that perhaps aren't necessarily true, and what the implications are for you as a leader in local government. So one of the first key issues or myths around motivation is that we can motivate people. Well, we can't. I can't. You can't. All we can do is create the circumstances or the environment by which people decide to become motivated. So what that means essentially is that it is an inside job. So people themselves will decide ultimately whether or not they become motivated. So I found that very liberating when I was managing, because I thought falsely that I could actually motivate people. But what I found was after a while that I couldn't. It was their decision. It was their choice. But all I could do was to create the right circumstances for people to become motivated. So I got to that level of thinking, and that can be quite liberating when you get to that level of thinking. Now, that doesn't mean we give up on people, of course, but it just means that we need to have the right environment, and if we have the right environment, our chances of motivating people, of course, are increased. But ultimately, of course, it's their choice about whether they become motivated. A second important myth around motivation is that some people are motivated and some aren't. The truth of the matter is that we're all motivated. Every one of us on this planet, just to survive, has to be motivated. Just to get out of bed this morning requires a level of motivation. So we've all got that in us. The question really is, are we inspired by what we're doing? And so it's important for us not to make the generalisation that people are not motivated. People are, it's just that they mightn't be inspired. Now, if you doubt that, just think about this for a moment. If you're near a body of water, and I'm sure you are, whether you're on the east coast or whether you're near a river or a dam or even a swimming pool, if you actually took the person you thought was the least motivated person in your team and you took them into the water and you grabbed them by the neck and you pushed their head down underwater and held it there for a period of time, you would find, of course, that they'd be struggling like anything to come to the surface because they're motivated. In this case, of course, they're motivated to survive. And so we're all at that stage of being motivated. It's just a matter of how we might actually tap in and inspire people. So what that really means is that we need to actually understand our people more effectively. We need to spend more time with them. We need to have these conversations that I've been banging on about over the last couple of units. But everyone ultimately has a level of motivation. And sometimes it's interesting when you talk to people outside their work. They have the most incredible hobbies or interests, and you can find that it'll be quite surprising what they'll tell you. So the motivation's there, it's just the inspiration perhaps isn't. The third key point is that motivation is a subjective concept. And what that means essentially is that motivation is what motivates one person won't motivate somebody else. So it essentially means that we've got to get to know our people more effectively. And the big trap that you and I will fall into is that we will try and motivate people according to our own level and own motivation. But the reality is that what motivates you may not be what motivates other people. So be very careful with this. Some people are motivated by prestige. Some people are motivated by material assets. Some people are motivated by camaraderie and friendship. Some people are motivated by the challenge that the work presents. And some people are motivated by, they can be motivated by anything. They might be motivated by security. Some people work in local government because they perceive it to be a secure job, and therein lies their motivation. So the key thing for you is just to talk to people and find out what it is that motivates them, and that can be very, very powerful and effective. Another key point about motivation is that the But motivation, intrinsic motivation is more powerful than extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic meaning internal, extrinsic meaning external. What I mean by that is that people will often, it's their internal drive that is the motivator, the key motivator. We can provide trinkets, we can provide rewards, we can provide recognition, praise, we can do all these things, and they will help, and I'm not suggesting we don't do them, but just be aware that the powerful motivation is the intrinsic motivation. That is, so some people, perhaps in your team, will just get on with their work at a reasonably high standard, whether you're there or not. And then there'll be other people that no matter what you do, what you offer them, how you recognise them, how you thank them, doesn't seem to make much difference. And that's why recruiters will often say to me that you're better off recruiting someone who has a high level of intrinsic motivation and a low skill level versus someone that has a high skill level and a low level of intrinsic motivation. So the argument is, if we've got someone that's intrinsically motivated, we can teach them the skills that they need. And so it's really about the inner drive, the inner motivation that becomes very, very critical when we're working with people. Now this one's highly controversial, but we often overrate money as a motivational force. Now, I'm not suggesting money's not important. I mean, obviously, if your local government decided not to pay everyone for whatever reason, council had a resolution not to pay everyone tomorrow, well, I can imagine that the motivation levels would drop very quickly. But the point is, if you could double everybody's salary at the other end of the scale, you wouldn't get double the productivity, would you? So in other words, there's a threshold where money's important and where money no longer becomes a motivational force. Now, I thought it was always interesting during the mining boom that lots of people, of course, in local government, particularly in central Queensland, decided to go and work in the mines because clearly they could earn twice as much money. And a lot of people did take up that opportunity. But what was interesting is a lot of people didn't. A lot of people said to me that they enjoyed the friendship and the camaraderie. They liked the 9-day fortnight and so forth that local government provided them. So the money certainly was attractive to some, but not everybody, of course. There wasn't a mass migration to the mining industry during that time, even though the mines were promising double salaries and all the rest of it. So I think it's important for us to understand that we overrate money. Money, after all, if you think about it, is really paper and metal. Money itself is not motivational. It's, of course, what money does that becomes critically important. So above and beyond a certain amount, money won't make a difference in terms of people's motivation. And research has shown that clearly. Frederick Hertzberg is probably the most famous academic that's looked at this. As an engineer, he found that after a while, money was no longer a motivator when it got to a certain level, certain threshold. But of course, we're confused by this because people will talk about money incessantly, and it creates this impression that money's everything and all we need to do is just pay more to get more. It's not necessarily the case, and I'm sure you'd be aware of that. Another critically important concept is that people, at the end of the day, people are motivated by two driving forces, pain and pleasure. So people, you and me, everybody on this planet will try to avoid pain at every opportunity and will try and seek pleasure at every opportunity. And the trouble with that simple little framework is that people conceptualize pain differently and people conceptualize pleasure differently. So what's painful for one may not be for someone else, and what's pleasurable for one may not be pleasurable for someone else. I'll give you an example. You've got two people in two separate cars parallel to each other at a red traffic light. And both of those people are going to the same meeting in local government, and both of them are 10 minutes late for that meeting. The meeting was supposed to start at 9 o'clock, it's 8:50, and they're waiting for the red light to change. Person A in car A is sitting there chilling out, listening to some nice music on the radio and just basically rationalises that it's not really anything that they can do about it, and so they're not letting themselves worry about it. Person B in the other car is swearing and cursing and carrying on because they feel, they're going to miss the meeting and they're late, and there's going to be consequences, and they let down their boss and all the rest of it. So person B obviously recognises that as a painful set of circumstances, whereas person A doesn't conceptualise it as that. So we spend our life seeking out pleasure and avoiding pain, which is another principle. So hopefully what that's done is it's given you an opportunity to think carefully about some of the important elements around what motivation is and what motivation isn't. So what I want to do now is talk about the 10 qualities that employees look for in their job. Now, as I said at the outset, this was a survey conducted by Harvard. Now, it was a few years ago, it was 2005, but it was done across 3 continents, so it was done cross-culturally, and it was done across all levels of employment, right through from baby boomers right through to generation X and Y and all the rest of it. So it was, and both male and female, and it's quite interesting because here are the 10 qualities that employees want in a job. Now, what they were required to do was to list down what their number one quality was. And what the researcher did is they collected all of this and basically categorized them. So it was a frequency type research model. So the number one thing on the list that I'm going to share with you in a minute was the thing that the majority of people said was the most important thing in their job, and then the 10th one is the 10th most important thing, and so on. But as I'm going through this list, what I would like you to do is think about yourself. Think about yourself at 2 levels. Think about whether or not all of these 10 things are actually in play in your current local government environment. And also think about these 10 things from a leadership perspective. Are you actually doing everything that you possibly can to create the environment where these 10 things would flourish? If you are, then you're creating the motivational environment by which people may choose to give their best. If you're not, well, there's room to work on those things. Remember, this is not my data. This is the culmination of 9,000 people cross-culturally. So they're not all Americans, and there is a lot of application here in Australia, and I believe that some Australians were asked in the survey. So let's have a look. What do you think number one might be? Do you want to have a guess? Well, number one was, or is, to work for efficient managers. Right, now that might surprise you, but people really do want to work for good leaders, and what that's got implications, hasn't it, for you and me, because what it means is that if we don't give our best as leaders, then we're probably violating the number one thing that people want in their work. And when I first saw this, I was a little bit puzzled by it, but then I realised that the other 9 things that they shared with you and me were basically things that really were part of being an efficient leader. So I can understand now why they put that as number one. And so that's, of course, why you're doing this Lunch and Learn program. You're doing this because, of course, you want to improve your capabilities as a leader. So let's have a look at number 2. Number 2 was that people indicated that they want to think for themselves. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, well, I wish some of my people would think for themselves. But generally speaking, people want autonomy. They want the freedom to make the decisions about how they do their work and, those sorts of things. They certainly don't want to be micromanaged, and that would be one of the most demotivating things that you or anybody else can do, is to be staring over someone's shoulder, barking out instructions to them. You might think that that will work, but it won't. It's not sustainable. So we want people to come to work and think for themselves, and more importantly, they want to do that, generally speaking. Remember, this is 9,000 people. This is an aggregate. This is an average across 9,000 people. The third most important thing is that people want to see the end result for their work. In other words, they want to feel that what they're doing is making some sort of a difference. Now, one local government council that I was working in, it'll remain nameless, but I went in and I did a simple survey. I went to the outdoor workforce and I simply asked them to rate their current job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10. 10's high, 1's low. Just give me a score out of 10 where you're at right now. Anonymously, I collected all that information and I worked out an average. I went into the indoor staff and people obviously at administration and working in the building, and I asked them exactly the same question. How would you rate your current job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10? 10's high, 1's low. And I don't know whether this will surprise you or not, but there was a significant difference in the levels of enjoyment in the work. The outdoor staff had a higher rating than the indoor staff. And I was a little puzzled by this, and I asked a few outdoor workers, why did they rate it as they rated it? And the universal response that came back is that we can actually see the work that we do. We can see the pothole that's been filled. We can see the bridge that's been built. We can see the road that's been paved. We can see the footpath that's been put in place. We can see the gardens that have been trimmed. So in other words, they had a very clear line of sight between the work that they were doing and the actual end result. Whereas the people in the office, when they filled out a report or a form or responded to some emails, they couldn't really understand what the end result would be, and therefore that it impacted on their motivation levels. So what the implications are for you as a leader is that you need to do everything you possibly can to let people know what the consequences of their work will be. Now, if you're working in the outdoor environment in council, well, that'll be easier. But if you're working in the indoor environment, you're going to have to start helping people get a line of sight between what they're doing and the end result. It's not quite so easy. It's what Simon Sinek talks about when he talks about the why of work. We should be explaining why we want people to do things certain ways so that people get a context and an understanding of what it is that they're after. So that was number 3 on the list. And of course, in places that are not for profit, it's a lot easier to do that as well because people obviously join for the cause often and they're looking to make a difference in the lives of disadvantaged people. So it becomes a little bit easier for them to see the end result of their work. Number 4 on the list. Number 4 on the list is to be assigned interesting work. Now, most of the work that we do, whether it's local government or anywhere else, could be categorised as drudgery. All right, it's probably fairly routine, mundane, not particularly interesting. What we need to do is to try to be conscious of giving people, wherever possible, interesting work that will stimulate them to grow and develop and challenge them. So we need to be looking for those opportunities and we need to be encouraging them to take up those opportunities. Because ultimately what these 9,000 people have said is that being assigned interesting work is quite important in terms of me measuring the quality of the work, of the job that I have. So again, you can probably think of some anomalies where you've tried to challenge people and they haven't stepped up to the mark, but there might be other factors involved there. But at the end of the day, if you give people interesting work, you are fulfilling one of those 10 qualities that people want in their work. Number 5, people want to be kept informed. They want to know 2 things about their work. One is they want to know what the direction of council is. Where's council going? What are they aiming to do? What's the new corporate plan? What are the new priorities of the new council? Secondly, they want to know what is changing in their work and how their work is being affected. So the idea that no news is good news or you'll get told on a need-to-know basis has no place whatsoever in your leadership. You need to explain to people clearly and persistently what they're expected to do in their job and what the key and core priorities are of the organisation until you're blue in the face. And that's really, really important. And even to the extent that if you don't know the answer, that you actually say to someone, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, but what I'll endeavour to do is to find out and get back to you. So people want to be kept informed. I don't think it's surprising that people want to be listened to. So people want to feel that their opinions are valued, that people will at least listen to them. Most people are reasonable enough to know that their idea may not get up or it might be challenged by you, and rightly so, but they at least want to be heard. So it just basically means, and that's why I want you to have these conversations with your team members, because by listening to people, you start to pick up on things that are important to them. So listen to people, give them your undivided attention. Don't second guess what you think they're going to say, even though you may well be right. Actually be in the moment, be mindful, listen to what they have to say, and you'll fulfill number 6 on the list. Number 7 on the list is to be respected. Now, you may not like the persons that you work for. Some of them you may get on well with, some of them you may not. That's life. But at least be respectful of them as employees and as human beings, and that becomes critically important. So that means don't interrupt them. That means listen to what they have to say. That means don't talk down to them. That means treat them as an equal in many respects. And if you do that, you're showing respect. And respect is a critically important plank of what people want in their work. And the person that's the most likely to demonstrate that is you, because you happen to be the leader. So treat people with what I call dignity, workplace dignity. Treat people with dignity, and you're likely to get much better results. Number 8 on the list is to recognise them for their efforts, and that's why I wanted you to continue to give those 3 bits of positive feedback each day. Find something going right and let people know that you appreciate it. Say thank you more often. Appreciate the work people have done. Let people know that you can count that you're happy with the work that they've done. Very, very important. Highly underestimated, and one of the things that you and I can do instantly that takes a couple of seconds. So just recognise people for their efforts, and they will appreciate that, I'm sure. Number 9, people feel that they want to be challenged, or at least this is what the survey data told us, that they want to feel a sense of challenge. Now again, you probably know people in your work team that may not want to be challenged, but I think generally speaking, people want challenge. They want to feel as if they're growing and developing in the work that they do. So push it a little bit. Give people interesting tasks. Ask people's opinions. Get people involved in other matters. Let them sit in for you at meetings that you can't attend. Do whatever you can to help people be more challenged in the work that they do. And finally, or at least on this list, though people want to feel as if they've got opportunities for skill development, and local government is generally pretty good at this. So, this is a learning opportunity for you, but what other learning opportunities can you create for your team? And it may not be sending people off to a lunch and learn. It might just be you sitting down and giving them some coaching. Or it might be you to explain something more clearly, or it might be you buddying them up with somebody else in the workforce that's more experienced. Whatever it is, try to make sure that you see your role as helping people or facilitating people to grow and develop in their role. Now the argument is, if you can create an environment where all of these 10 things are present in your work team, there's a reasonable chance that you've created a climate where people can then make a choice or a decision about whether they increase their discretionary effort in the work. Now, not everyone will, for the very reason that I mentioned last time, that it's their decision, it's their choice. But you'll find that if you do that, you'll get significant progress, generally speaking. And that's all you're looking for, is just incremental change. So guys, if you've got any questions you want to ask me at this stage, I mean, admittedly, this was, done in 2005. It's not Australia-based, it's not local government-based, but my advice to you is if you're sceptical about some of these things, then I'd suggest you go and Google, 10 qualities that people want in their job, and you'll have no shortage of lists and no shortage of research that will give you an idea of what those things are. Right, no questions? All good? Okay, let's move on. Now, what about if you have one person in your team and you just don't know who is just not motivated? What do? You've got one person who's just clearly not inspired by the work. What do you do? Well, the answer is ask them. Ask them. What I mean by that, asking them, means this, that you should sit down with them in a conversation and just ask them something like this. Is there anything that I'm doing or not doing that can help you be more engaged in the work that you do? That's not a hard question to ask, is it? Now, you might get something really intelligent coming back that might be helpful. You may get nothing back as well. But isn't it worth asking the question? Isn't it showing dignity to that person by, in fact, asking? Isn't it also saying to people that I see my role as helping you engage in the work that you do? Isn't that a good thing? Is that so difficult to ask? Don't be worried about what the other person says. That's their decision, how they respond to that. But just ask them. Do it behind closed doors. Do it in one of your fortnightly meetings. And just see what comes up. It's probably true to say that some of the people that work with you probably do not believe that their effort could ever get to a 10 out of 10. They just don't believe that work is about that. That's okay. But I'm talking about getting someone from a 4 to a 5. I'm talking about someone from a 7 to an 8. I'm talking about discretionary changes and so forth. That's all I'm talking about. And I think it's fair and reasonable for you to ask that question wherever you see it being relevant. Now, I want to share with you a model of that I've put in one of my books. This is the book at the end of the job description. I want to talk about the work that people do, and I mentioned this at the outset. So let's talk about the obvious first. The work that people do, that's their job role, can be tied up in their job description. So that's basically the technical skills and tasks that people are expected to do in order to fulfill what's on that piece of paper we call a job description. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go there. I mean, that's already in place, hopefully. But I want to challenge you that there's another dimension of performance that often goes missing, particularly in my experience in local government. This is what I refer to as non-job roles. These are things that people do that aren't necessarily, or not do, that aren't necessarily on their job description. These are things that make an impact, however, on performance, significant impact. Now, this is not a new concept, and it's been around for about 20 years, this whole concept of non-job roles. And a lot of management thinkers and scholars have had trouble coming up with a universal list that's applicable to local government and every other industry that's out there. So I thought I'd bite the bullet and actually consider these non-job roles. And I came up with 4. Excuse me, I'll just get a drink of water. And here are 4 things that I think you can consider. One of the non-job roles I think is important is a positive attitude and enthusiasm role. Now, Don't get me wrong, I'm not expecting people to come to work bouncing off the walls with great excitement. That's not going to happen. But I don't expect people, on the other hand, to come to work backbiting, undermining, finger pointing, not taking responsibility, being negative. Those things are not in short supply, unfortunately, in local government. And I think it's fair and reasonable that people become solution focused and reasonably positive and proactive about the work they do. I don't think it's unreasonable for you to talk to people about that. Would you agree? Can you imagine if everyone in your organisation, for example, had a negative attitude? I don't care what skill level they've got, it's going to be a significantly bad place to work, which probably won't have a huge amount of discretionary performance. The second role that I think is critically important is the team role. Now, by team role, I'm talking about someone who's a team player. Now, although local government is quite hierarchical, the reality is that we expect people to work in teams, whether that's a functional team, a cross-functional team, or a project team. We expect people to work in teams. And I just think it's a cop-out when people say to you and me, I'm not a team player. I just get on and do my thing and go home. To me, that's non-negotiable. I think that everyone in this day and age has to learn to be a team player. So I don't care how technically competent they are, if they're actually undermining the team, then they're actually taking, I would have thought, 2 steps back and 1 step forward. In other words, they're a negative on the organisation. So I would probably challenge someone and say, well, you say you're not a team player. I want you to be a team player. It's important that you are a team player. And challenge them on that in a conversation. So being a team player is really important, and it's often not on the job description, but it's something that will impact performance in local government significantly. Another key role is what I might call a career role. Now, a career role means that I want people to continually upskill, to grow and develop in their role in local government. Now, again, we come across people that say, oh, I'm too old to go to this training program, or, give it to someone younger because they're just starting out in their career. It's a cop-out. At the end of the day, if people aren't growing and developing in their role, then they're going to be left behind. So this isn't just in the interests of your organisation, it's actually in their interests as well. So we want people to continually grow and develop. And it's a non-job role, it's not on the job description. Now, the final one that I think is critically important is innovation and continuous improvement. We want people to come to work with their brains and not leave them in a paper bag at the doorway. We actually want people to think of ways and means of making the workplace more efficient and more effective. How can we do things faster, simpler, with more safety, with greater interpersonal cooperation? How can we do those things with greater quality? These are the questions that we need to engage people in. This is a non-job role that becomes critically important. As we all know in local government, there's enormous pressure on not increasing rates and other discretionary income to keep the council organisation moving in the right direction. So we're going to have to think about ways of being smarter, ways of doing things more efficiently, ways of doing things more effectively. So we want people to bring their ideas to work. Now, the argument here, this model, is this, that the job role is on the job description, but the non-job roles are, I believe, almost, if not more, important than the job role in terms of the overall performance of the organisation. I mean, just imagine if everyone in your workplace had a negative attitude, they weren't team players, they've decided to stop growing and learning, and they had no good ideas and basically criticised any ideas that came in. What sort of place do you think that would be? I can tell you now it wouldn't be a very high-performing place, that's for sure. So I think it's fair and reasonable for you to be having conversations around these 4 areas that are on the right-hand side of the model. Okay, now I just want to finish up, conscious of time, I just want to finish up with a couple of reputable theories around motivation and perhaps talk a little bit around how they might apply to what you do day to day. Now, Abraham Maslow was a psychologist who was around in the sort of early part of the last century, an industrial psychologist. And he came up with a concept called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And his argument was simple. He said that human beings fundamentally have 5 basic drivers, and that each of those drivers, once they've been fulfilled, no longer becomes a motivator. So we progress up the pyramid, so to speak. And so, of course, this makes a lot of sense when you think about it. So he said the first and fundamental driver that we've all got is a survival need. So if their lives are being threatened, then they will do everything they possibly can to protect themselves. So that becomes the single motivator, the fundamental motivator for people. They'll want air, food and water and so forth. Once that's been nourished, they then want security, both physical and psychological. They don't, and this is why, we have this huge commentary about bullying and, the concepts around physical violence, because people have a fundamental need to not be bullied and not to be in a physical confrontation. And then we have a belonging need. Belonging means I need to feel I belong to something or a group of people, and that's why we've got so many different clubs and organisations in society, because everyone wants to feel that they're part of something. And then we have a prestige need, which is a need for higher self-esteem that comes from feeling as if our point of view and our contribution is of value. Now, if all of those needs have been fulfilled, we have a final need which Maslow calls self-actualization. In this case, on your slide, it's called self-fulfillment. So this is when people have all those needs fulfilled, when their final need is to be challenged, to grow and grow themselves and challenge themselves. Now, you may well be at the top of the apex, and herein lies the problem, that you may try to be motivating people through challenge and you find that they're not responding. It may well be because there are other needs that haven't been fulfilled. Now, most people in our sophisticated society come to work with their survival and security needs met. So the only 3 things that you have to concentrate on really is belonging. So how can you help people feel that they have an important role to play in the team that they're in? Okay, because if they haven't got that, they're not going to contribute, according to Maslow. Then how do you make sure that their opinions count? How do you make sure that the quieter ones in your meetings have an opportunity to speak up, that you value their input? And then for those people who have got those 2 needs fulfilled, the question then is, how do you challenge them to grow and develop more so? Right, so it's an interesting theory. So make people feel part of the team, make their people feel that their opinion counts, and give people the challenges they need to fulfill the work they do. Another interesting theory is McGregor's theory, which is that can often be called theory X and theory Y manager. As you will see on your screen, it's not up yet, by the way. It's taking its time. Just turn off the camera, that might increase the. Okay. Are people still there? Can you hear me? I just noticed this is taking a long time to load. So I'm assuming that's some sort of an internet problem. Can you just type in clear or not clear or something? Just let me know what you're seeing. You're not seeing the screen that I'm on, but you probably. I'm just wondering whether the voice, the a long time. All right, look, I'll just talk through this. hopefully, hopefully the video will come out fine, but it doesn't look like it's responding very well at the moment. But I've turned off the video camera, so it should help. But look, Theory X managers are people who tend to distrust people, basically. They believe that people dislike work and that if they're not standing over them, they're not going to do their work. They will avoid work, that people are generally lazy, that people prefer direction rather than no direction. They would argue that they would avoid responsibility. Hello, it's come up on the screen now. I hope you can hear me, guys. I'm not sure that you can. I haven't had nobody come back to me responding in the question box, so I'm just looking on and hoping that you can hear me. But at least now the screen has changed, and you've got the screen that I'm on here. I can see that. Anyway, the Theory X managers are very okay, just reconnect. Thanks, Judy. Wow. Okay. The internet. Scary, isn't it? Anyway, I'm doing my best. There's nothing I can, it's out of my control, so I just keep going. We're almost at the end anyway. Now, look, if you've worked for a Theory X manager, it's not much fun, frankly, because they're basically micromanaging, they don't trust you and all the rest. I'm sure many of us have worked for Theory X managers. I would strongly recommend you as a leader to adopt a Theory Y mindset. What I mean by that is, the Theory Y manager sees work as natural. People are self-directed. They will organise themselves most of the time. People will accept responsibility when it's given to them in the right way, and they're generally imaginative and creative. Now, that's where you need to be as a leader, to have those sorts of attributes. This model of McGregor's has been criticised in the past for being too simplistic, that people are probably a combination of X and Y, and that's fair enough. But I think if you had to have a bias, I'd certainly be having the bias around the Theory Y if I were you. Now, the last theory I'm going to share with you is Daniel Pink's theory, which I can see is taking a bit of time coming up on your screen, but anyway, I'll just talk about it. Daniel Pink wrote a really great book called Drive a few years ago now, and in this book, based on research, although it's a really nice, easy read, it's not an academic book, he basically said that if you looked at the workplace, you could sum up 3 things that people want in their work. And he was really pretty much talking about knowledge workers, and these were the 3 things that he wanted. Okay, so the 3 things he wanted was, or 3 things, sorry, that people wanted, or 3 factors that led to better performance, if you like. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Now, what I mean by that, or what he means by that, is autonomy and this is summing up everything that we've done pretty much today. What he meant is that people want to feel a sense of autonomy. They want enough freedom to make choices about how they conduct themselves in the workplace and how they do their work. All right, so that correlates with some of the research we looked at before. They want mastery, and that is they want to be able to feel as if they have the opportunity to grow and develop in their role, and that becomes important. All the while, they want a sense of purpose. In other words, they want that line of sight that I talked about earlier. They want to know the why. Why are you asking me to do this? What's the end result here? How is this going to impact on the ratepayers? So those questions, the why of work, are critically important. So if you give people enough autonomy to make their own decisions, you provide them with the support they need to grow and develop, and you give them a sense of purpose about what their work is about, Daniel Pink would argue that you're going a long way towards creating the environment by which people make that ultimate decision to become motivated. All right, so summing up before we finish, we're just about done. Guidelines for managing. Clarify the task role. Show people how they can contribute. Match their job with personal motives. Make apparent the personal gains for personal and team productivity. Remove organisational blocks. remove supervisory blocks, recognise individual success, encourage personal goal clarity, provide frequent positive feedback. There it is. Now, if you do all of those things, you create an environment where people may give extra discretionary effort, which is critically what I'm on about. So I just wanted to finish up by saying try to use autonomy, mastery and purpose in your leadership decision conversations and stick with it no matter what. So that's your homework. I want you to actually go away and try these things. And then when we meet again in 2 weeks' time, I want to hear your war stories, and we will do understanding people and their personalities. So thank you, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity of working with you. Thanks for your tolerance for changing your schedule to meet my schedule. And I fly home from Weipa tonight back to Brizzy, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. So thank you, everyone, and I wish you a lovely weekend and all the very best. Goodbye.